Children of poly relationships, what was it like growing up? I grew up in a small town and 1/2 of the town were hippies. In the 3rd grade one of my friends couldn't go on a field trip because he returned a permission slip with the word parent or legal guardian crossed out and signed by the group representative. Of course in the 3rd grade we didn't know what was going on until my mom explained it to me. But when the kid was told he couldn't go, the whole hippie commune came over to class explaining to the teacher how all their kids will be raised by the group and it's damaging if they see a single person as their parent or guardian. I have a friend who is a child of a throuple. He's a cool dude, pretty normal. He says as a young kid he would always try the but mom said yes thing to get what he wants, and if his dad called him out on it he'd just say it was the other mom until they all got together. For clarification, as far as I'm aware his parents are a closed unit. Perhaps that is easier for a kid to fathom and normalize than if they always had different and new partners at home or whatever. When I was young my folks dated a couple of couples. One was very long term. We were military families but they managed to finagle a transfer together. So wow. That would have been like 8 years at least. They kept in close romantic contact when they separated. But IDK if they qualify that as still being together. They were my aunt and uncle. Essentially, we and their kiddos got sent off to grandparents, theirs and ours, together to give them alone time. It was kinda a given that we'd all see each other every couple days. Either they'd come to our house or we'd go to theirs. Not for them to sneak away for sexy time, but just to spend time together and be a family together. I knew I could go to them about anything, I could talk to my folks about, and even some things I couldn't. That closeness continued even when my own folks split. IDK what standing they had with them after that though. Unfortunately, my aunt kinda had a psychotic menopause and we had to go NC with her. Nobody knows that I'm still in contact with uncle though. IDK how my mom would feel about it. But he stayed a rock for me when my own dad didn't. Same drama as any other family I guess. Just more players on the stage. Hey. It's a post for me. Honestly I think it's way more boring than most people would think. Most of the time. My mom wouldn't introduce a partner to me unless it was a long-term relationship. So most of the time I got the single mom experience. I think the most exciting thing was going out for dinner to meet someone new. And occasionally my mom would date someone who had a kid my age. And we would awkwardly play together while our parents were on a date, as in, we were playing in my room upstairs and a movie date or SMTHN was going on in the living room downstairs. Really for the most part it was so completely average other than knowing my mom had 2 girlfriends and eventually I also got a stepdad. The worst part was around 8th grade when kids found out and started bullying me for it. Asking all kinds of disgusting sexual questions about my parents. No one wants to think about their parents having sex. Eventually I learned to just not tell anyone unless we were close and I knew they were cool. I only ever had one person I trusted enough to actually come to a family picnic where my mom's partners would all be there. My mom's partners aren't my parents but they are part of my life and my family. They're wonderful and supportive. And have helped me through some horrible dark spots in my life. I'm grateful to have such a wonderful, loving family. So yeah. Not very exciting. I know. But it's my life. I am 15 years old. And my parents often have potlucks where they invite their partners over. My parents are good people. And everyone they invite over are good people and have become my friends. I also usually will meet their children and become friends with them. It really is just a wonderful environment. But it is very difficult to maintain. More partners equals more drama. And a lot of times 2 people will get in a fight and cause the whole group to split for a while. But all in all it's pretty great. I had a therapist in a poly relationship and they all 3 had a child together that was around 9 when I met them. 2 dads and 1 mom. Unfortunately, they couldn't be fully open about the fact that the 3 of them were in love since before she was born because the one she called dad worked for a religious college and that information getting out at all could have cost him his career. So she only called 2 of them mom and dad while she thought of the other like an uncle that visited every day. She seemed normal. She liked to make slime. Hey, this is one that I can finally answer. I come from what would seemingly look like a nuclear family. Mom, dad, sister, me. My parents, however, would go out on weekends to swingers clubs or house parties. I didn't know this as a child. I would say I learned this when I was 13ish. And it was in discussion around jealousy and my response to jealousy in a high school relationship that I was in. I distinctly remember my dad saying to me, "Jealousy is an emotional response to you missing something. You need to work on finding out what is making you jealous," followed by discussion about how him and mom have never been closed and that they were happy to seek other partners as they saw fit. There were many discussions around dating culture that I remember. I remember a few of the people that they were friends with would come over to our house. They were great people. I considered them like I would any other friend of my parents. I ended up expanding into poly relationships early in high school. My triad went to the homecoming dance together, for example. Can't really say it felt weird or odd as it was just what I was used to, but I think I can honestly say it's made me a more open and loving person. I'm not afraid of being close to people because my parents were always very close with their friends, for reasons that are obvious now but less so at the time. I also grew up getting to know my parents' friends quite well because my parents were very close with them and trusted them enough to look after us. Although I'll admit this was probably more so they could have the house free of children. It does mean that I'm still quite close with a lot of them and consider them friends of mine outside of my parents' friendship with them, and I also have a few more parental figures to choose from. Meaning I can pick the best ones from each to try and emulate. All in all, I'd say I'm a more well-rounded person as I got to know a lot more people as family growing up, as well as exposing me to many different personalities. Had a friend several years ago that grew up with poly parents in Kansas. What he described seemed like a pretty healthy family upbringing. And I would describe him as a well-adjusted, happy human. I don't think either parent was particularly promiscuous. But throughout the years they would have other partners. He was a proponent of polyamory and had a pretty good way of explaining it. Basically, no one person can satisfy your everything. So polyamorists have more than one partner that allow them to experience romantic partnership on a fuller level of their being. Polyamory isn't my cup of tea. But it is possible to have healthy relationships with this lifestyle, including that of a family. This will probably be buried, but it happened to my husband, who didn't even realize it was happening. When he was a kid, his father lived with his mothers, one of whom he thought was his birth mother and the other was an identical twin to her that he just called his aunt. He said it felt pretty normal. He never knew it was poly until much later in his life. Several years back, his mother had passed away and his aunt contacted him again asking if she could move in with him to have him help her as her caregiver. He agreed. And just before her passing, he received a letter from her lawyer, written by the twins and his father, finally explaining everything. Turned out his aunt was his actual birth mother, who had kids with his father too before he was born, but who had passed away in a house fire. The mother that raised him was completely sterile and in fact had a hysterectomy at a very young age. He was in complete shock, but said it made sense how close everyone was in the house, despite keeping all the adult stuff behind closed doors. His big shock seemed more the fact that his father kept up 2 relationships instead of just one. And he was either scared, impressed, or both. My mother was involved in a poly relationship for a while when I was a kid. It was very confusing. For a while there were 4 of us kids around. Me, the kid of the other woman, and the 2 kids of the man. We were all pretty confused and resentful. Our favorite joke was pick a number and wait in line. It was fine. The poly part didn't really become known to me till I was 13 or so. The only weird bit was if I was bringing home a friend or someone I wanted to go out with, I had to kind of explain what to expect beforehand, and some people got weirded out. Rosa. I'm an adult in a monogamous marriage now. I saw firsthand that getting 3 people to come to a consensus on anything was exponentially more difficult than just getting 2 on the same page. Edit. I just realized too, how I was raised also made me very comfortable with taking about sex and boundaries in a relationship, where I think a lot of me peers were more easily pressured into things they weren't comfortable with. My parents were swingers. They went to bondage clubs and things like that. I found out in my late teens. So I didn't really care all that much. I learned of it through my friend who told me his mom told him that my parents asked if they were interested one night when they were chilling in the hot tub. Started to put the pieces together after that. All the Halloween costumes in that box that I always overlooked. It's weird. But whatever, more power to them. Don't think they do it anymore though. They're getting a little too old for that life. Polygamy is very common on my dad's side. My grandpa has 30 plus wives. My dad has about 4 last time I heard. Anyway. It was awful. Hated that part of my childhood, and my mom escaped and left with me when I was a child. Sometimes I see him. It's just super awkward around him and my half siblings. Edit. My fault. I thought polygamy and polyamory were interrelated. Also, I grew up in Papua New Guinea. It's very common. Yes. My grandpa actually has 30 plus wives. I do not know my dad's side that well, which is why I can't elaborate that much. Hope that clears things up. Close bracket. I know a few young adults who grew up in poly households. From what I recall of them as children, teenagers, there was a fair bit of neglect. Because often their parents would put their date nights and partner time ahead of the needs of the children. There was also some resentment among the childless partners of people who dated poly folks with children. Since there was often an expectation that the childless partner would provide free child care, because children are a community responsibility, when another partner wanted to go on a date with someone else. Unicorns, the hot bee babes sought out by hetero couples exploring polyamory, were particularly vulnerable to this. I know 7 plus families with poly parents and more with open relationships. The kids are kids. Some are great. Some are anxious or manic. It varies by parent and child. Not by the poly. The poly parents that aren't great parents are pretty comparable to the normative parents that aren't great. And the poly parents that are great are pretty comparable to the normative parents that are great. The biggest differences I can think of are going to be about communication, affection, and love. But even that's just a tendency and not a definitive distinction. That's my experience anyways. Bumping for responses. I'll come back and do it. I'm not a poly kid, but my friend is posts if there's not much else. Edit. Alright, might as well post. 3 acquaintances, 41M. 41M. 3XM, in my friend group are in a poly relationship. The older 2 are married with child. The younger of the 3 partners is in a sexual relationship with the oldest. And otherwise does not interact much with the other. From what the eldest of them has told me, his husband just isn't very sexually compatible with him. But they already had a kid. So they stayed together and involved the younger partner in their relationship. The child, who I think is 7 at this point, is aware of the situation. At least to the extent that one of his fathers spends a lot of time at his boyfriend's house. Last I saw him, the kid was doing fine as a person. I am however greatly concerned about his parents and his home life. Both of his parents have some degree of mental illness for which they take medication. And the third in their relationship isn't that good of a person emo. Were it not for them being financially well off, I'd be a lot more concerned. Okay. So I just want to point something out. A polyamorous relationship is not people just fking around with as many dicks and pee-size as they can. It's not Ben a hoe or FCK boy. It is a relationship between 3 or more people. Not just physically, but emotionally as well. Emo. There's nothing wrong with it. If you wanna have 2 or 3 boyfriends, girlfriends, more power to you. As long as everyone is happy, healthy, and over 18, looking at you certain Mormons and religions out there, then it shouldn't be anyone's business or place to judge. My parents were poly, but it started out of cheating and getting back at one another. I suppose they were always open but not poly. Basically, the woman who was my dad's girlfriend for many years tried to get him and my mom to divorce so she could be my mom and my dad's wife. Years passed of me being shuffled around and ignored so they could pursue their love lives. Eventually my dad cut the woman out of his life. My parents divorced. And now I don't have a relationship with either of my parents because they're shitty. That was part of it. Edit. Since this is getting some upvotes, I'll add. My mom also dated this woman's husband. They had a kid who was a lot older than me who did his own thing. My mom had other partners, but my dad kinda kept this one lady around for many years. Neither of them are poly open whatever anymore since the divorce. That was many years ago. This all happened when I was 5-11. And me and my sister had a shitty life for it. They are mentally ill people who attract other mentally ill people. I did try non-monogamy myself and also had a very bad experience later on. While my mom told me to just keep trying it. That woman who my dad cut out later tried to get my mom to be with her. My mom is queer. Both my parents are now single, I think. Weird F-king thing. My parents weren't poly until I was a toddler. I guess. I thought of the other couple as just nice people my mom and dad were close with. They met online and came to visit. They all clicked well. And eventually the other couple moved in with my family. I didn't make the connection they were all together until I was a teenager. I suppose I thought they were all just roommates of sort, though bed swapping and sharing was occurring the whole time. By that point, my mom and dad had divorced, and so had the couple. My dad married the other woman. And my mother married the other man. My mother has divorced and remarried again. And my father and stepmother are still together. Almost 20 years later. TLDR in retrospect. It's just kind of an odd situation. But I honestly didn't even realize my parents were poly growing up, and now my dad is married to the lady instead of my mom. Hey. A question relevant to me. Honestly. Though. It wasn't super different than any other way of growing up, I assume. I just have one extra dad than everybody else. That's just always how it's been. And I never really thought about how abnormal it was until high school. Even then it was more just thinking whether I really cared enough to explain to other people. Or just go with a white lie on paperwork or whatever. Biggest difference I can think of while growing up is that there was always someone home. Which can be frustrating for a rebellious teenager. I'll caution everyone by saying, just like any relationship structure, there are good and bad examples. There are mono parents that FCK their kids up by abandoning them, doing drugs in front of them, being married 3+ times over their childhood. There are also plenty of poly relationships that are well executed with multiple partners. Hell, there are poly parents that just aren't dating anyone for large stretches of their kids' lives. So no one would even know. But in general, when done in a healthy and organized way, it's pretty standard. Kids might grow up to be far better at organizing their time. Poly folks know all too well how to manage multiple calendars, and maybe a little more empathetic since it's typically more progressive households that practice poly. But you won't find any more or fewer kids who came out FK'd up emo. Sucked, but not necessarily because my parents were poly. It was because they are all insane and incredibly emotionally and physically abusive. I have no contact with them. I actually didn't realize this until I was a teenager, and that aunt always knew she wasn't really my aunt. N was my parents' partner, but we always knew something was a little weird. The good things were that Aunt N was typically the fun one and did do a lot with us where our parents would not. Mom was depressed and severely mentally ill. We were afraid of Dad. The bad things I noticed in their relationship was that Aunt N was a huge manipulator, liar, thief, viciously jealous that she didn't have kids of her own of my mom. And she used us kids as a therapist to talk about her problems. Our financial problems. Gaslight. Use us. Etc. They were not nor are still very educated people. I do not believe they even know what polygamy means, and my parents before she came into it already had a horrible relationship, so you can imagine adding another person didn't help either. That being said, I still think polygamy is fine for normal, rational adults who can talk about their feelings without throwing you into a wall. My son is a member of a throuple with 2 women. The first is his college GF who always had an open relationship. During a long distance period of their relationship he started very casually seeing girlfriend too, but over time it got more serious and now they all live together. things are happy and wonderful for them, but I really do worry about how the dynamic would change were someone to fall pregnant. I worry about jealousies and inequalities rising up. But mostly I worry for my future grandbabies. The societal pressures and teasing from outside the home, as well as possible resentments and issues within the home. I can see how, if things work the way they are planned, it could be a wonderfully supportive and rewarding way to grow up. But you know what they say about the plans of mice and men. So I actually really appreciate the insight of this thread. I want to be supportive of my beloved throuple, but part of being supportive is discussing possible pitfalls in hopes of avoiding them, and this has already highlighted some. It's also pointed out some of the positives. So thank you. Not a child of one. But my dad had a poly relationship with his wife and a girlfriend. My dad and his wife were in their mid-40s. Girlfriend was 28 and looked like a prepubescent teen. I'm all for people having whatever kind of relationships they want. But it was super weird. And obviously headed towards drama. I once went on vacation to Hawaii with them. Just me, my dad, and his wife and girlfriend. Girlfriend stole pills from stepmom and blamed it on me. Eventually, my dad ended up getting divorced. Stayed with girlfriend a while. Girlfriend is anorexic. Ex-wife comes back. They ship her to a rehab for her anorexia. Then get remarried. Wife forbids dad from any contact with ex-girlfriend and has cameras installed all over the house to make sure dad isn't cheating. Because apparently he did that. But, yeah, no. She cheated on him when he was deployed in Afghanistan, so I don't feel bad for her. If you couldn't guess. Dad got divorced again eventually. Different girlfriend. No poly. I'm angry just writing this lol. Children raising children. I have a friend couple that has an open relationship. It's the strangest thing. They leave their weed bongs out in the open. Cut like sailors and generally are just annoyed by their kids. But their oldest daughter isn't allowed in Spencer's because of the SX toys. She's 13-14. Understandable. I just find it strange that they can know about drugs and cut words, but SX and violence? No sir. Not okay. It's fine. I got hello extra parents. But I wasn't allowed to have friends over when I was little cause my mom was scared someone would call CPS. And I don't get along super great with my stepmom. Not cause of the poly thing though, our personalities just don't mesh well. I had one therapist insist that my beef with her was over the fact that she was F-king my dad and not the fact that she routinely threw out my belongings. The other extraneous moms are cool though. I have two parents. And they've had a couple relationships with other couples. The first one didn't last super long and I never got to know them super well. But the current one has. For me that meant that for a while when they first got together. Since we lived about an hour away from each other. Every weekend we'd stay with them and I'd have to sleep on a shitty air mattress downstairs. Eventually they moved to the city we live in. And we all moved into one largish house. For 2 years we lived there. With their kids. After a while we moved out. As living with another entire family wasn't working out. And moved into a house just down the street. Since then we've lived pretty close by. And they see each other all the time. With one of them or one of my parents staying over a couple nights a week. It's all just been pretty normal. And the other couple has 3 kids who have over all these years become like siblings to me. I feel like this might be a bit unclear because I'm kinda hurriedly typing this out. Combined with trying to stay somewhat anonymous and being tired. I'll be happy to answer any questions if so. Worst parts. Keeping someone else's secret. Sometimes dates are loud. People who think children must be raised in heteronormative homes. Difficulty finding representation in fiction. All of which are perception issues. The good. More adult role models and module relationships. More adults that treat you like a person. Diverse set of interests. Cooking. Communicating. Skills. Etc. Makes for more well-rounded home. Especially when date nights change up who's home. I got taken to a lot more movies this way. An ex of one of my parents has been validating my feelings about the problems I have with that parent, which are unrelated to being poly. I like to think I turned out mostly fine. My siblings are pretty great. Fucking weird, man. But I will say this, at least my dad was honest with my mom instead of banging his secretary behind her back. Instead he moved her into the house and she was part of the family. Being the only Scientologists in town didn't help. Whoa. This applies to me. I grew up with one dad and two moms. My bio mom and my other mom both got pregnant at the same time. So I have a half brother that was born 2 weeks before me. Since we are the same age, everyone thinks we are twins. But they get really confused when we tell them that no, we're 2 weeks apart. I also have a full sister. And my brother has a half sister that was born 18 years before him, who I'm not technically blood related to, though she is still my sister. My childhood was pretty normal except I had two moms instead of one. Extra parenting, I guess. There were 1 or 2 cases of my dad getting another girlfriend and them moving in with us for a year or so. They just lived in an extra room and helped with us kids and all that. All of my parents had separate rooms. One of my moms moved out when I was probably 10 because of issues with my dad's girlfriend. I still got to see her but not nearly as often. It was harder on my brother though, as it was his birth mom that moved out and he was stuck with my biological mom, who is kinda crazy. We all still have a good relationship and I visit my other mom and my sister often. We are still a family. Just a kind of weird family. Also, all my parents, me and my siblings, are all bisexual except for one. He is kind of the black sheep because of how normal he is. Lol.